I want to talk about what's awesome. Now, let me just start with, you're awesome. This place is awesome. The next couple speakers who I've already met, they're awesome. Wait till you hear Ken Medema. It's all awesome, right? Maybe even I'm awesome. The problem is that this is a word that I think we've overused to the point where it's become like devalued currency. It just doesn't mean what it used to mean. In fact, it's said that we've become an awe-deprived society. We have cut funding for the arts and music. We don't go outside as we once did as much to be awed by nature. The standards for excellence have been dumbed down to the point where I think people think that good enough is good enough. And good enough just isn't good enough. So when I think about what's really awesome, what I think about is things that I stand up for. So what do you stand up for? Increasingly, we're being asked to stand up for what we believe in. I stand up for amazing performances, for musical, athletic feats that are just extraordinary. I'm sure some of you were standing for the Super Bowl last Sunday. I stand up out of respect for the elderly. I stand up for the national anthem. I stand up for things that move me. And yet we just don't have as many things anymore that we stand up for. And so I want to bring you a story of one of the last times I stood up for something, because I think it illustrates my point today. So about 2.5 years ago, I was competing at Masters Swim Nationals at the University of Maryland. And as I was standing on the side of the pool waiting for one of my events to be called, I saw an older woman bring up a plastic lawn chair and put it next to one of the lanes. And then an even older woman sat down in the lawn chair with a little robe on, flip-flops. She looked very happy. And I thought it was so cute when they called her event that I took a picture. She got in and held onto the wall. So it was the 50-meter freestyle. And so the announcer said, on your mark, get set, go. And off went Annie Donovan of Georgia Masters swimming at the age of 97. And for the next 2.5 minutes, I watched something extraordinary happen. As she stroked down the pool, one arm at a time, everyone began to stand up. And by the end of her swim, after 2.5 minutes, the whole place was on its feet. The natatorium was screaming. And so it reminded me of the fact that you just want to stand up for things like that. And when we stand up, when we're in the presence of things that cause us to believe they're awesome, what's important is that we're in the presence of something we call grit. Grit is a word we're hearing a lot about these days. It's really the word of the year. And grit means passion and persistence in pursuit of long-term goals. But not all grit is good. Know this. Good grit inspires, and bad grit flaunts. I don't have enough time to go through all of this in depth, but I want to give you a little bit of a tour of what we need to look for and what we need to cultivate and embed in our organizations if we're going to inspire performance that truly is awesome. So there's something I call stupid grit. Stupid grit are people who have goals that are really bad goals, awful goals, horrific goals, like Adolf Hitler. But he couldn't be dissuaded from his goal. He was going to see it through as far as he could. That's stupid grit. That's bad grit. Other kinds of stupid grit are mountaineers who are climbing Mount Everest, and a whiteout is moving in, and the Sherpas say it's time to turn around. You're not going to make it to the summit. And they have what's called summit fever. That's stupid grit. A lot of them die on the summit or on the way down. That's stupid grit. One of our country's best male marathoners was not even able to compete in the most recent Olympics. Why? He had stupid grit. He had trained at marathon pace every day for years, to the point where his body was so worn down, he couldn't even walk anymore. Stupid grit. People with stupid grit don't listen to other people. They don't take advice. They're determined to see something through to the finish. That's not good grit. That's not inspiring grit. Then we have what I call selfie grit. Selfie grit. Is it inspiring if you have to tell everyone how hard you're working? If you have to tell everyone how great you are? Johnny Manziel, the most electric player in college football in years, won the Heisman Trophy as a freshman at Texas A&M. But he always had to do the money sign. You know, when he had a great play, it was all about him. It wasn't about the linemen who blocked for him. It wasn't about the receivers. It was always all about him. So it's bad grit if it's all about you and it's not inspiring. And then there's faux grit. Faux grit is fake grit. And we know who these people are. These are the people who take shortcuts, and they want you to believe they did something hard. Lance Armstrong wanted us all to believe that he was this tough man who could overcome cancer and win the Tour de France. And he didn't do that. He was using performance-enhancing drugs the entire time. We have an epidemic of cheating going on in academic institutions, with PhD candidates faking or plagiarizing their research. That's faux grit. And then one of the most egregious examples of faux grit that I was looking into when I wrote my next book is when people pretend to have won the nation's top military honor, called the Medal of Honor. There are people who go to flea markets and they buy fake medals of honor, and they wear them, and they ride in parades, and they wave at people as if they had won the Medal of Honor. That's faux grit. That doesn't inspire anybody. Bad grit flaunts. But then we have good grit, and that's what we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about. Good grit. Now, we all know about the people who have what I call Mount Rushmore grit. These are the people whose actions have changed the course of history. They've changed the course of history because they stood for the best. They stood for the best in humanity. Their values were the kinds of values we stand up for. We stand up for honesty. We stand up against discrimination. Those are the things that stand at the turning points of history. The more I looked at the turning points in history, the more I found this kind of grit. The Malalas, the Martin Luther Kings, the people who, regardless of what was thrown at them, they didn't back down. And because of the way in which they didn't back down, and they took the abuse with dignity and self-regulation, that's how they got followers. Mount Rushmore grit changes history. Then we have what I call celebrity grit. So I was on the podium at my 25th reunion for Harvard University when J.K. Rowling gave this incredible speech, 2008. And it was about the benefits of failure. And you can still see this on YouTube. It's a remarkable, remarkable speech about risk-taking and failure. And one of the things I admire so much about J.K. Rowling is, yes, she's a celebrity. Yes, she's one of the richest women in the world. But she uses her celebrity for good. It's even been said that she saved reading for our children. And I can testify to that as a mother. All three of my kids, I couldn't buy one Harry Potter book, I had to buy 3 of them. And then they'd split up for the next 12 hours and go to their rooms and read these long, voracious sessions. When my daughter went to college, the only books she took with her were the Harry Potter books. J.K. Rowling changed reading, and she gave a generation of children a lot of pleasure in reading. But she also uses her money to fund good causes against sex trafficking and other things. But we have other celebrity grit. We have Dick Van Dyke. We have Oprah Winfrey. We have the woman who founded Spank, Sarah Blakely, who has a phenomenal philanthropic mission. So that's another kind of good grit. Good grit inspires. And then we have what I call Mount Olympus grit. And these are the Michael Phelps of the world. These are the people who have changed our perception of what the body can do. Michael Phelps didn't set realistic goals or smart goals. He set unrealistic goals. We're not shooting for unrealistic. We're not shooting for realistic. We're shooting for unrealistic at times. The kinds of things that make us stand up, One of my neighbors is Katie Ledecky, the most dominant female athlete in the planet right now. I've watched her since she was a little girl, tackle swimming. I remember when her coach took her out for lunch at the age of 14 and said, "Katie, what's the best thing that could happen to you this year?" And she said, "I don't know, maybe go to the Olympic trials?" And he said, "Katie, try again, maybe." And she said, "Well, to go to the Olympics and win?" And he said, say it again, say it louder. And she did. And from that day forward, Katie's training changed, her mindset changed. Everything about her changed. Not that she wasn't extraordinary before, but she really carved out new territory in swimming. And so in the most recent Olympics, she is still the only woman to make a man's cut for the Olympic trials. But there's other people who are not just the gold medal winners, who are also Mount Olympus grit. Think about the Paralympians. Think about the refugee team who went to the Olympics most recently. They too were athletes who pushed their bodies past what they thought they were capable of. We stood up for them too. They inspired us. But like the generation we have now where everybody grew up with a trophy just for standing on a soccer field like my kids did, I mean, these are people who didn't do it for the trophy, and maybe they didn't even get the gold medal, but they still pushed their bodies and their goals to the limits of what was possible. So that's Mount Olympus grit. But finally, the kind of grit that we have all around us, that we want in our workplace, that we want to be surrounded by, is what I call ordinary grit. This is the story of Kevin Downs, who's really just 20 minutes away from here. I didn't know that until I got here. He went to the Iraq War, and his Humvee was blown up in 2005. 6 of the people in the Humvee with him were killed. He was thrown 60 feet into the air. When he landed, he had broken almost every bone in his body. Ultimately, both of his legs below the knee were amputated, and he won the Purple Heart. He didn't go buy a Purple Heart, he won a Purple Heart. And what's so interesting about Kevin Downs is when he came back from the war, he just wanted to feel useful again. He wanted to have a purpose. And so we asked if he could volunteer at the high school where he had once been a 3-sport athlete. You know, he had run track, he had wrestled, and he'd played football, and he came back from the war mangled, just hoping he could feel useful again. And so they said, certainly, you can cut the grass. And so he did. And so he would come every day and tend to the field silently, just doing his job. And the football coach noticed something really interesting. And he said, the kids stopped whining. They stopped complaining about two-a-days. They stopped complaining about the heat. They stopped complaining about how hard it was to be on the football team. And this is what we see with ordinary grit. The people around us who are doing extraordinary things in ordinary circumstances. Would you hire a Kevin Downs? Of course you would. So ultimately the high school did hire him, and he's now the assistant football instructor, and he just goes about his job, inspiring people. What if we embedded ordinary grit in our environment? What if that was what we sought out and interviewed for and cultivated? What would it be like? And so here's what I suggest. When you're interviewing people, when you're trying to find examples of people who have grit, who you want to get to know more about, ABC, always be curious. Always ask them what their story is. That's how I found out about the woman who does my colorful nails. I was talking to her one day and I said, what's the hardest thing you've ever overcome? And she told me a story that was so stunning, I didn't know what to say. She escaped from Vietnam on a boat at the age of 16. Her older brother was on the boat with her. As they approached the shores of Thailand after a harrowing few days at sea, the boat got stuck on a rock. Her older brother volunteered to dive in and free the boat. He died, but the 30 other people on the boat lived. So Na, my nail technician, when she got to Thailand, she got there in one piece. Her brother's body washed up a few days later. The next few years were unimaginable horrors. She was raped repeatedly. She was in a jail in Thailand for 5 years. Ultimately, she found her way to the United States, the country that she felt would give her the greatest opportunity to create a life, which it did. She has one child who's an engineer, another one who's a senior at Virginia Tech. What if I'd been, too into myself, too absorbed, too much like selfie grit to ask her story? Think about this. We're surrounded by stories like this. And I found this out last summer also. It was very hot in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, and I leave out bottles of water quite often for my mail carrier, who I hadn't really talked to before, until one day I was putting out the water as he was approaching. And so I said, would you like to come in and sit down, just get off your feet? And he said, gee, that would be really nice. So he came in, I found out all about Gemmo. Gemmo is a first-generation student from Jamaica. He dropped out of Morgan State University when he got his girlfriend pregnant to do the right thing. Now he works extra shifts as a postal carrier, nights, weekends, Sundays. I had so much respect for him when he left. I found out what his dreams were. He wants to go back to school and learn coding. I found out that I knew someone who was doing courses in microcoding. I left it on the door. He inspired me. Would you hire him? Of course you would. And so here's what happens when we embed these people in our organizations and in our lives, and when we notice that they are there, when we have the curiosity to see they're there. We have what's a positive energizer effect. These people energize the people around them, like Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors, the highest plus-minus factor in basketball. When he sets foot on the court, everyone else plays better. Everybody. That's what these people do. They make you play better. They set hard goals. How many of you have seen Hidden Figures? Amazing. Is that an amazing, awesome. That's an awesome movie. So I saw that last weekend. I was like, these are the kinds of people who you might not know their story, but they just set really hard goals. You know, overcoming discrimination, not just against women, against African American women. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, they helped to put a man on the moon. So people with ordinary grit set hard goals, and they're persistent. Junior Bernard is married to my stylist. He escaped from Haiti. He escaped from Haiti after the earthquake. His goal was to come to the United States and to just get an education. His father fixed VCRs for a living, and he would watch these snippets of videos about people in the United States doing what he said were always exciting things, like going to their jobs and getting married. To him, that was the most exciting thing you could aspire to. And he just would tag along when he saw Americans coming to Haiti. He would just ask if he could practice his English on them. He found a dictionary in a garbage can, and he memorized words. Ultimately, one man gave him a chance and brought him to the United States. He failed his first attempt at taking the GED, passed at a 5th grade level because people had stolen his money and he hadn't been able to enroll in school. 6 months later, after sleeping with the GED textbook, in really a stunning outcome, he passed the GED, got a 4-year scholarship to Alvernia College in Pennsylvania, and he gave the commencement address. Would you hire Junior Bernard? Of course you would. And finally, they cultivate patience. These people are the ones who just were part of the greatest scientific discovery in the history of science in the last 100 years. These 5 people, for decades at the LIGO lab, confirmed Einstein's theory of relativity by discovering gravitational waves. Decades they spent. They weren't looking for that easy win. They weren't using faux grit. There was nothing about them that hurried the process. People with ordinary grit, they help other people to cultivate patience as well. So as you go through the process of asking yourselves, how do we find these people? How do we bring them into our organization? How do we develop and embed them? How do we create the kind of environment that's contagiously positive for people like this? Always be curious. Ask the right questions. What's your story? What's the hardest thing you've overcome? And what you'll find is it's not the people with the resume that sparkles with the Ivy League degrees. That's not what it is. It's not even the highest GPA because of grade inflation. It's going to be the people who went on a Mormon mission, the Eagle Scouts, the people who did sports where there were 2-a-day practices and no cheerleaders. Look for the people who've done hard things, because I've discovered one thing. Ignorance yells and wisdom whispers. Bad grit flaunts, good grit inspires. And so when you can find these people, when you can identify them, when you can bring them in, when you can salute them, when you can have that kind of contagious positive energizer effect that we are all seeking to have, we won't just have a culture where we throw around awesome like devalued currency. We will actually have environments where we are moved to stand up. And these will be environments full of authentic grit. And when that's the case, you will really be able to say, that's awesome. Thank you very much.